Anyway, I'm here now.
Excellent. All right, and I can see quite a few more people popping in now, so I think we will certainly make a start. Welcome everybody to our Transafe WA webinar this morning, the final one in our little series for this year. I hope everyone's finding enough energy to make it through to the end of the year. So just quickly, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about Transafe WA. My apologies to my regulars who get this a little bit often, but I'm sure it will work to reinforce all the good work that we're doing in your minds as well too. So Transafe WA is a non-profit road transport industry safety initiative, and we have been operating in WA since 2013. We were founded to provide a forum for industry to come together to look at best practice in industry operations, and our focus has turned to events and to projects over that time. So since 2013, we have delivered 24 road transport industry safety forums now to thousands of participants throughout Western Australia. And these forums provide a place for the discussion of needs and risks. They're also a conduit for industry participants to get to speak to their regulators directly and the key decision makers for industry. At each of our forums, though, we've heard from industry participants about the need for the general public to learn more about sharing the road safely with heavy vehicles. So with income from grant applications, we have started to do some work in that space. And the Give a Truck campaign, oops, I'll go back there, which you can see the logo for, is one of those initiatives. So we're rolling out that campaign on the backs of trucks at the moment and light vehicles. There's animations and content that's on our Facebook page about educating people around the key tips that we've got from drivers about sharing the road safely with them. And a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment now is also directed at addressing the new road safety strategy for WA, which was just released last month. So you might like to take a look at that. It's called Driving Change. And the WA State Government has set the ambitious target to reduce road fatalities and severe injuries on WA roads by 50 to 70% by 2030 and to zero by 2050. So this strategy is a call to action for all West Australians to collaborate and drive change in their communities, and that is very much what Transafe WA tries to do within our industry to contribute to making a difference to fatalities and severe injuries on WA roads. A major project that we're working on at the moment, which we are hoping to launch next year, is a safety truck resource for Western Australia. So this is Instructor, it's been named. It's a road safety education initiative that will comprise a prime mover and a customised trailer mobile classroom. We're working on really engaging high-tech educational experiences at the moment, utilising things like virtual reality and augmented reality to educate current and future road users how best to safely interact with large trucks and road train combinations, both in the metro area and regional areas of Western Australia. We're working towards a 5-year on-road program, and it's going to be supported by an expert team, web resources, social media, and it's going to cost us a bomb. So we're at the point where we have got significant funding, mostly from federal and state government sources at the moment, but we'll be taking the project to corporate sector in the new year with various levels of support for that project. Instructor will also provide a place for fleets, so it will be able to be utilised by fleets for things like toolbox topics. So our presentation this morning with Kieran and Kingsley will be an example of the sort of thing that we'll be able to take into fleets in the morning before the truck potentially heads out to a school or a community event in the afternoon. So it will have a range of applications, and if you're at all interested in partnering with this project, or you know someone that you think might be, please get in touch with us at Transafe WA. So today's presenters are Kieran and Kingsley. just making Kingsley a co-host at the moment. They have a combined experience of over 60 years in helping people overcome and prevent musculoskeletal pain. Their strong spine system began its life in the power stations of the WA Southwest in the 1980s. And in the past 30 years, people from mining, oil and gas, government, military, police, hospitality, health, agriculture and transport have all benefited from the skills they've learned. And we are going to do that today too. So their webinar today is a workshop that will cover the key moments that all transport operators encounter, which will spell the difference between them or you becoming a sufferer of back, neck, shoulder pain or not. It will also give practical tips in avoiding the slow development of excess tension that will impact your risk of injury, sleep quality and overall mood. So just a couple of little housekeeping things from me. I am recording today's webinar, so I won't be able to provide that thanks to Kieran and Kingsley for you to review or share with colleagues after today's event. I'm about to hand over to the guys and there'll be space for question and answer at the end of the session, or as they prefer to do it, potentially through the session as well too. And yeah, I'll come back to you at the end and hope you enjoy the session. Let's get going. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
There
we go. Everyone's seen that okay?
Yep.
Life happens while we make other plans. Yeah, so to tell the story of Strong Spine and how it evolved, let's talk about me for a moment. I have to sort of tell my own story and how that intertwines with the development of this program, which has been such a big part of my and Kieran's lives over the last decades. Like most people career-wise, I always remember that quote from John Lennon. He says, when he said, life happens when you make other plans. And in my case, life happened when I had no plan. Coming back from traveling and working in the US as a rooftop balloon installer, I took up an offer from someone to do some part-time work with Western Power in, or Sequa, as it was called in those days, as part of their rehabilitation unit. And you've got to remember, these were the days when occupational rehabilitation wasn't really thought of. There was no commercial rehabilitation providers. I think only one other company in Australia had an internal rehabilitation program, along with Sequa. So I was lucky enough to be involved in the ground floor, really, in the development of what is an occupational rehabilitation system or program. And that involved really just smoothing and streamlining the communication system between all of the stakeholders that get involved when someone gets hurt. So, you know, we're talking about doctors, GPs, specialists, insurer, of course, the employer, the site managers, the worker themselves, all based on that idea. And I think this statistic is still very current, that once someone's off work for longer than 12 weeks, your odds of getting them back into some sort of meaningful work are very, very slim indeed. So trying to improve the communication of what can the person do, can we get them back doing that? You know, the old concept of light duties, which was almost taboo in those days. So yeah, as I said, we developed these programs, and I started to see very early on, just from a point of view of a trainer and coming from a phys ed background, because that's the thing with my involvement in rehabilitation. I didn't have any medical background. I didn't have any experience in this industry. As I said, I just sort of fell backwards into it. That was a bit of a disadvantage early on, because I was massively out of my depth, I think, early on. But it also enabled me to ask a lot of dumb questions in terms of, why are you doing it this way? Why, you know, how come you aren't teaching people this way? And those dumb questions actually bore fruit in many ways, as you'll see. So yeah, very early in that experience, let me take you to a hall in the railway, the old East Perth railway station. And I don't know if they allowed smoking indoors in those days, but in my memory, the room was full of smoke. So it was the meeting of the all of the trade unions that involved in Sequa. That was their kind of annual meeting. And I went along with my boss, Martin Sims, who, you know, is one of the smartest people I've ever met, and is an organizational psychologist who was the one driving the setting up of these rehabilitation programs and the whole concept of rehabilitation. and he was presenting the success we've had so far, showing the unions how this process really benefits the welfare of the worker as well as helps the business and all that sort of stuff. And he stood up there and introduced himself, and I think this union meeting was part union meeting, part social catch-up, because these guys were already fairly well underway in terms of drinking. You know, it was a bit of a party atmosphere in there. It was a kind of a raucous atmosphere, and one of the guys sort of stood up and challenged Martin and basically read from the union script at the time, which was, you know, this has got nothing to do with the welfare of the workers. It's all about compromising workers' rights, you know, trying to dictate to them which doctor they can go to. And it's got nothing to do with helping people. It's all about just improving the business and all that sort of stuff. You know, that really strong, cynical, anti-management kind of line. And Martin, being smart and being an organisational psychologist, was ready for that challenge. And he sort of he slapped his transparency on the projector in those days, and it was one of those. I think even that was really newfangled high technology at the time, talking 1987. And he said, well, if you look at the numbers, we can show you here that we've reduced these negative outcomes by this amount, and there's X number of people have now back in normal work that they wouldn't have been under an older system. And so the numbers show that we're actually doing quite a good job. And the room just burst into laughter, and sort of raucous kind of laughter. And one of the guys shouted out, you love your numbers, don't you? And that was my first experience in the idea that information alone does not change people's viewpoint, and it doesn't change their behavior. And in fact, some of the research you can see recently on this sort of stuff is really interesting. It shows that, in fact, information of any kind does nothing more than just reinforce someone's pre-existing beliefs. It just reinforces the story they're already telling themselves and the story they're already telling the world. Whether that information supports or contradicts their viewpoint or not is irrelevant. Most people, when they receive information only, will just use it to reinforce their pre-existing belief. The only thing that's likely to change people's behavior is information matched with some sort of experience where they can test that information for themselves, as we'll talk about as we go through. So that was my first kind of, I think when I was thinking back about how Strong Spine was developed, that was the first thing that really hit me, the first experience that gave me this idea that, gee, just telling people stuff doesn't actually do anything unless you give them an experience in the opposite, to the contrary. So fast forward a good half a decade, and by then I'd left Western Power, and I'd started teaching manual handling programs myself and my business Human Factors at the time. I don't think I was calling it Strong Spine System by then. I think it was still the Advanced Back Care Program or something like that. But here's me up in the Pilbara where we're doing some stuff for Telstra, running around with my mats and my spine and teaching people all the stuff that I developed at that point. And I can remember very well a seminar that I ran for a medical practice. This was in Northbridge, and there was specialists there, there was psychologists, there was regular GPs, there was physios, there was nurses. There's a whole range of medical professions. And even though I'd been doing this kind of thing for a good half a decade by that point, or even longer, and I'd also gathered some further qualifications. My experience working in rehabilitation and injury prevention guided my postgraduate study, and I'd collected a master's degree by then, majoring in biomechanics of this whole issue. But yeah, I was still a bit intimidated talking to all these doctors and these boffins, and I did my thing. We did the session, and when they finished it, they were all pleased and said good things, etc. But the head of the practice, a South African doctor, came up to me afterwards and he said, "Oh, I can see what you're doing there. I can see what you're doing there. You start with this concept, and then you add a layer to it, and then you add another layer to it, and you gradually add layers to the point where it becomes a practical thing that the person can use. It's very clever. It's genius. It's very, very clever." And I kind of went, "No, it's just coaching." Because that's where I come from. I come from a sports coaching background originally. And when I first started looking at what manual handling training was being done, I equated it to sort of handing someone a tennis ball and a racket and saying, "Here, hit the ball into the corner of that court," because that's about the level of coaching there was. And as opposed to what a phys ed would do, which is put the racket on the ground, get the person to toss the ball into the air, and only when you can consistently land that ball into the head of the racket have you got a consistent enough ball toss to take a swing at it with the racket. So it's a skill progression. So we build it slowly over time through experience. And that's essentially what strong spine is. It's a series of experiences that people can then use with the good information we provide to back up that experience to hopefully change their story about how they work, how they approach their work, how they use their body, etc. So yeah, it's just coaching. In the years since, they've been doing this kind of training now for a lot of years, as I've said, and gone away from it for a while. I have to say, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've only just started swinging back. The demand for this kind of training has only just started to surface again after being fairly well out of fashion for a little while. And we'll talk about that issue later. But in the years of my involvement with Kieran and with Biosim, which is a company that he founded a long time ago, and we've been working together for something like 20 years now. I don't know the exact number, but it's about that. It's decades anyway. We have heard these stories literally thousands and thousands of times. And those stories have been told by people who have been asked one very simple question, which is, how did you hurt yourself? What were you doing when you felt the pain? And the years and years of hearing these stories, it started to occur to us some point on that journey. It started to occur that, hang on a minute, we're just hearing the same story again and again. And this is not completely exclusive. This doesn't account for absolutely every injury out there, but it accounts for a hell of a lot. And we've gradually called these the 4 dumb things. These are the 4 main stories people tell of what they were doing when they hurt themselves. And if we've only got 10 minutes, say that we've got a company that only just wants to do a tick and flick. They don't just want, we just want you to give these guys the right information and that's all, some sort of simple program. If I only had 10 minutes to talk to people, this is all I'd say. Just don't do these 4 things. And those 4 things are, the first one here is lifting and twisting in the same motion. So when you pick up something and then you've got to move it laterally, like this crane operator here is moving these footings, aren't they called? Something like that, underneath the crane. He often has to pick them up, but also apply a twisting force to the spine at the same time. That is pretty much the biggest challenge the spine ever faces in a workplace from a biomechanical point of view, having to apply force from lifting and then twisting in the same motion. So I would imagine for most of you, that would be pretty obvious, yeah? Most of you kind of have been told that one, lifting and twisting in the same motion, yeah. The second one, it's a big lever. So applying force on your body a long way from the body. And this is an example here from a workshop in Panawanika. There's a better photo, which I couldn't find. I don't know what's happened to it, but there's a photo of this guy. He's leaning further over and he's hitting that pin with the sledgehammer back towards him as opposed to hitting it away. But either way, you can see that there's the EPV, the elevated platform there, is constraining the guy's movement, and he's having to reach a long way from himself to apply that force. So that's a story we hear a lot. Probably something quite common for people like yourselves is just take it to your private life. If you're unloading the shopping out of the back of your car or lifting something off the back of the ute, and instead of moving things out of the way and sliding something towards you before you lift it, it's just sort of lifting it at full reach, just sort of picking something up at full extension without thinking. That's, again, a story we hear a lot. That's what I did. Third dumb thing, a little bit more technical, and that is applying torque through the shoulder when it's at full extension. So you often see this in the mechanical trades, in the maintenance kind of industries, using spanners and torque wrenches and all these sorts of things, reaching a long way from your body. I'll just reach up and I'll just crank that tight from full reach. And we won't go into the details here, but you can see this is a slide I've pinched from one of the strong spine programs. It just shows that when you do that, you're putting most of the job onto the muscles that should actually just be stabilizing your spine, stabilizing your shoulder. Given that your shoulder is a very naturally unstable joint, that humerus is just sitting in the glenoid fossa like a golf ball sitting on a tee, and it gets its stability from all these muscles that wrap around it. And if you take the shoulder to full extension, the muscles that should be using that system as a lever to create force, which I'm talking about, the pecs and the biceps and all those big muscles, they're kind of taken out of action because they're at full extension. They're away from their neutral. They're away from their midpoint. They're away from their neutral length, so they're less powerful. So you're putting more of the load onto these muscles that should just be stabilizing the shoulder. And the one that goes ping is usually supraspinatus, one of those rotator cuff muscles. And it's a very painful injury, very long-term kind of injury. Anyone here done something like that? Anyone done a rotator cuff, either in sport or at work? It's there's usually someone. it's yeah, we're talking month, and it's very painful. So yeah, that's a common story, like I said. The last one, and this brings it back to, thankfully with the transport industry, I think the fourth dumb thing is the one that applies the most, and it's pretty obvious. And this is also the one that I think explains most people's incident of back injury, where they feel some sort of sharp sensation like a pop or a click, and then they get the pain, and in their mind, their story is their back's gone out, or they've slipped a disc is another story you hear the chiropractors say sometimes. That scenario normally happens, or that event normally happens in this scenario, and that is when someone is in flexion, and then that flexion is followed by force. So say you're weeding your garden, or you're doing some brick paving, or you're fixing your motorbike, or whatever. You're in some job where you're in flexion, like you can see on the left-hand side here. When do you notice that's caused you a problem? Is it while you're doing the activity? Is it while you're weeding, or while you're tiling the bathroom floor or something like that?
It's later on in the day when it sort of stiffens up.
Yeah. It's normally when you're it's normally later on when you straighten up. Usually it's actually when you straighten up. Ever notice that it just takes you a little bit longer to get straight than you would like after you've been in those sort of flex positions? You don't have to be a biomechanist to understand the mechanisms going on here to realize that extended prolonged flexion is making you progressively more vulnerable for an injury. And it does it a number of different ways. And in fact, we don't really know for sure what's going on, but there's been some research that gives us a fairly good guess. Mechanically, the structures that support your spine are being stretched and lengthened beyond their normal resting length, to the point where they're becoming more vulnerable, obviously. But also the muscles that stabilize and support the spine, they are gradually switching off to allow you to sink deeper into that position. And it takes them a while to switch back on again. So if in the 2 to 3 minutes after you've been in that position, you do something heavy, like you see this guy here, he's gone from laying out these cables to sling a load, to then lifting that. I don't want to know what that, what's it called, a U-shackle or something? What's that? I forget the name of that. That's a common thing you see, but as you can imagine, that's probably about 80 kilos or something. And he's lifting that just after he'd been in those sort of flex positions. And that's a classic scenario. And we hear that story again and again. And you often hear someone say, oh, I must have a weak back. Must be something wrong with my back. Again, that story they're telling about their spine, it must be weak because all I did was just cough, or all I did was just do it my shoelaces, or all I did was just step down off the bottom step of a ladder, or all I did was stumble on the carpet. And but when we asked them what had you been doing in the previous 2 hours, they will normally tell a story of prolonged flexion. I was sitting in front of TV watching a footy marathon. I did a 2-hour drive. I was tiling the bathroom floor, whatever. Because if you're doing a drive for someone, say you're driving up for a picnic in the hills, or you're heading to the beach or something like that, and you drive for a couple of hours, and when you get to where you're going, what's the first thing you do? What's number one priority for most people? Esky, right? Normally get that out of the boot, something that's a relatively heavy item, right at the point that you're most vulnerable. And as you can see, we're stating the bleeding obvious here, aren't we? This issue probably accounts for most of the strain injury risk in the transport industry, because sitting involves flexion. Sitting involves some kind of flexion of your spine, even if your posture's pretty good. And we're going to challenge that idea of correct versus incorrect posture in a minute. But generally, the sitting position involves flexion of your spine. Not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's quite good in some ways. But the longer you hold it in that position, the progressively more vulnerable it becomes. And that's the message we give loud and clear, hopefully, to most people in the transport industry, because it's what you do next is going to set you up for an industry. And as you can see here, if you just miss that bottom rung on the ladder and hop down quickly, you're likely to put up to 7, maybe even 11 times your own body weight of shock through your spine, right at the point that it's most vulnerable. Then if you start doing heavy physical things like slinging loads, or maybe changing a tire, or even just opening up the back of a container or the doors of a freezer or something like that, anything that involves a little bit of strain, you're much more likely to hurt yourself in that position. So knowing this now, if you didn't know it already, and I'm assuming a lot of you kind of knew this already, what would be the single best bit of information, bit of advice to give people understanding this process now, understanding that flexion followed by force is probably the biggest risk people face? What would be one, just if you had to pick one, there's probably a couple, but what if you had to pick one habit that would change people's risk profile quite a bit? What would that habit be? Anyone got any
Moving
idea?
around a bit before you do anything more strenuous.
Yeah. Yep.
Having a
about
bit of a stretch, yeah.
Sorry, so
Having a bit of a stretch after flexion.
yeah, yep. It's about 90 seconds, 2 minutes, something like that. It doesn't have to be very long. But what you do in that time period, if you rest and stretch and maybe reverse that flexion a little bit by arching your back the other way a tiny bit, maybe do some of the stretches, which Kieran will show you in a minute, just some stuff that you can prepare your body for what comes next and take it out of that, switch on all of those muscles. I think that's the most important thing sort of technically to understand, is that we're not just talking about a physiological or a biomechanical process here. It's not just about warming up. It's about actually flicking the switches. It's about getting the nerves to talk to the muscles again, because gradually what's happened, if you've been in the static position, but then static flexion, is those nerves have stopped talking to the muscles. There's not that communication going on between them. And that communication has to be reestablished, and that takes some minutes. It's interesting when we look at pre-work stretching, which is not really the topic of this session, but I was just triggered to think of that just now. The longer, Kieran and I have both been involved in setting up exercise programs for workplaces. And the longer I've gone on with that kind of process, the more it looks like Tai Chi, the more it looks like something which is more of a neuromuscular type dance, as opposed to just mechanically stretching and warming muscles up and that sort of stuff. For that reason, because it's that interface which tends to lag and not operate when people have been in the static or flex position. So when you look at all of these dumb things, I'll come back to Pat Garrett in a minute. When you look at all of these dumb things, these 4 actions which account for so many strain injuries: lifting and twisting in the same motion, a big lever on the spine, a big torque force on the shoulder at full extension, and flexion followed by force. What drives people to do these behaviors? Can any of you think of a single story they're telling themselves in their head, or a single driver that's making people take these paths, that's encouraging people to make these choices? Anyone got any ideas? Anyone got any comments? It's sort of like a motherhood statement, I guess.
Just get the job done.
Very good answer. Who was that?
Sorry.
Siri. Yeah, very good answer. It's exactly what it is. They're succumbing to the illusion of rushing. That illusion that if you push really hard and put the pedal to the metal, you're going to get the job done faster. And I don't know how many different ways you can demonstrate to people that's not true. A colleague of ours, I don't know if Dr. Nick's on here at the moment, Nick Mabbitt, the sleep guy, a colleague of ours that we went around all over Australia with Clean Heat, actually running seminars like this, talking about driving. He demonstrates it to people clearly a number of different ways. He sort of says that you can, if you're succumbing to that illusion that you need to push hard to get to your destination, and you're changing lanes a lot, and you're running orange lights, and you've got the distance between you and the car in front of you right short and right down, because that gets you there half a millisecond faster, all that kind of stuff. All you're doing is altering your journey length by maybe over a 2-hour journey, maybe 90 seconds if you're lucky. You're not actually, once you're in the traffic flow, that traffic flow will deliver you when it's ready. You're not actually going to alter the outcome by rushing. And it's a very important thing to understand. And let's take it, it's a universal rule. I mean, let's take it to a situation where being the fastest is the best thing. Let's take it to an Olympic swimming race or a running race or a cycling race. If you talk to any top athlete, they will say the exact same thing. They'll say 100% effort means I go slower. My optimum speed is about 90% effort, because that's when my body's not fighting itself. And that's when I'm the most fluid and skillful and balanced and mindful as I'm racing along. So even at that even in that scenario, rushing doesn't work. Rushing doesn't work. Being trained and prepared does. So yeah, old Pat Garrett, the guy who won the gunfight with Billy the Kid, he was quoted as saying, "The secret to winning a gunfight is moving slowly, fast." So if he didn't feel like he had to rush, then what excuse have the rest of us got? And this equates to my mate Mick. He's a plumber, and he doesn't really believe in Bach health and safety. He kind of does now, but for most of our life of being friends, well, he went on being a plumber and me following my path, he was always slightly cynical about what I did. OH&S, it's just a bunch of time wasting bureaucracy. It doesn't really help and all that sort of stuff. And one day I was talking to him on the phone and he said, you know what? All that took was 10 minutes. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I was just tired today. I just had a big week. It's been hot. And I had this job to do and there was nothing behind it. And the guy's house was overlooking the ocean. And so I thought, I'm just going to enjoy this afternoon. I'm just going to focus on the craft of what I'm doing and just do it carefully and not rush. And I don't care if it takes another hour or so. Who cares? I don't have anything else on today. So I'm just going to enjoy what I'm doing. And I just methodically and slowly went through that job. And when I finished, I was blown away because it only made the job 10 minutes slower. All it took was 10 minutes. It didn't take too much longer. So, yeah, hopefully we've made our point on that one. I think it's these dumb things, they generally are driven by people trying to meet some external demand, some story in their head that they need to get the job faster. And that's a challenge we all face as in OH&S and in how we communicate to people, how we manage them, how we coach them. To make them find that sweet spot of mindfulness and rhythm while you're working, as opposed to trying to bust a gut. Doesn't get the job done any faster, and you're more likely to make one of these mistakes. Which leads me to the next story that people tend to have in their heads, which doesn't, if that story that I need to rush to get this job done is one of the stories that causes us some disadvantage. The other big story we have is this idea that I need to have a correct posture and that I'm too lazy to sit in good posture. And rather than just make this information, we're going to make this an experience. So I'm going to stop this share here because that's all of the pictures I need to show you. And I'm going to hand over to Kieran. And so we need to bring his picture up into the screen. How do we do that, Anastasia? Have you got Kieran there? Yep.
I can see myself and everyone else.
There we go. Nice, that's what we need. So if you scoot your chair away, mate, and so we can see you sitting side on. So you've all got to do something now. So just sitting there, where you are there, I want you to follow what Kieran's doing. And the first thing I want you to do is so our operators in the transport industry spend a lot of time sitting. It's the major physical challenge of the job. It's also most of the physical challenges of most people's jobs nowadays. It's most people's lives. We spend way more time sitting in this world than we did even as recently as 10 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. So let's just sit in what we think is supposedly good posture. I want you to sit up onto your tailbones, onto your sitting bones, the bones of your bum. I want you to rotate your pelvis forward and sit up onto those bones, okay? And I want you to put one hand across your lower back, across your lumbar spine. Can you feel that curve in there? Roll back and sit off those tailbones. Sit back on your tail, on the coccyx, the last little bit of your spine, and then roll back up and sit on those sitting bones again. This is one of the lessons we give people. One of the experiences and other elements of the program is that the position of your pelvis influences the shape of your spine a lot. But we're not going to talk about that here. But yeah, just sit forwards and so finish up sitting. So you're sitting on those tailbones. You can feel that lumbar curve in, okay? Next thing I want you to do is imagine we've got a hook and we've stuck it under your sternum, underneath the front of your chest, and we've lifted the front of your chest up. Okay. The last thing I want you to do is imagine we've grabbed you by the hair and we've pulled your head up. So made your neck long. It's as long as it can be without looking up or straining. Okay, so this is pretty close to ideal posture. What we might say is correct posture, which it isn't, but some people might think of that. What do you notice about this posture? How strong is the desire to sit back the other way? Most of you are finding there's a fairly strong desire to slump back the other way. Yep. Let's just sort of let that go, slump back down again, and then come back up again and sit back up into that tall posture. So see, there's a fairly strong force pulling you back down into that slumping or slumped posture. Okay, so let's just work with this for a minute. Put your hands on your thighs, or on your knees, just sort of Forrest Gump style, just sitting there with your hands on your thighs like that. The first movement I want you to do is just gently rock your pelvis back and forth. Now, for some reason, I can see harmony in my picture, and I've seen people walking behind you in the office there, and they're going to wonder what the hell you're doing right now if you're sharing this room, so bear that in mind. But yeah, see how you roll your pelvis back and forth, that the shape of your spine changes. You go from curve down to a C shape, and it comes back up into that S shape, just from the movement of your pelvis. Okay. And notice how your head and your shoulders are tending to follow the movement. As you roll your pelvis back, your head and shoulders collapse, go down, and as you roll your pelvis forward, your head and shoulders come up. What we want to do now is separate that movement. So just stop for a second. I want you to imagine now that your chin is on the shelf. So your head can't move, and your chest has been bolted to something. So your chest can't move either, but you're still trying to move that pelvis back and forth. So go back to trying to move that pelvis back and forth without letting the rest of your spine and shoulders and head and anything else move. It's quite hard to do, and you're going to have to drive it back and forth using some muscles. Which muscles can you feel yourself working here to move your pelvis without the rest of your spine following?
Abdominal.
Yeah, this is actually a good exercise to do. You're driving along, brace yourself against the steering wheel, roll your pelvis back and forth. You might have some explaining to do if you've got passengers with you in the car, but it's a very good exercise just to help switch on. Yeah, he talked about how prolonged flexion switches muscles off. This is a good way to switch them back on again while you're driving. And okay, slowly bring that to rest. Let it stop where you feel balanced. Just tip your head towards the roof for a moment. Look up towards the ceiling and just lock it there. Roll the pelvis back and forth a few times. Okay, bring that to rest. And then tuck your chin down to your chest. Lock in that position and gently roll your pelvis back and forth. We're just giving the body a different experience in holding these different positions while it moves the pelvis. Okay, slowly bring that movement to rest. And then just rock the pelvis back and forth a couple more times without any restriction, just what we did at the beginning. Yep. And then gradually bring that to rest too. There we go. That's the first time I've ever tried that in a webinar, getting a group to do an exercise. Hopefully those of you got something out of it. But what do you notice now? When you're sitting in that position now, so sitting back into that supposedly correct posture, what's happened to that desire to slump? Has that changed for some of you?
Yeah, it's not as strong for me. Mm.
Yeah, that's a pretty common response. A lot of people go, oh, I don't, this is more natural for me now. I feel sort of more balanced and natural in this position. Because all we've done is we've just messed with the body's habit that it's formed in that flex position. And we've got rid of a bit of the tightness. We've got rid of a bit of the muscular habit. And suddenly sitting in a more efficient, strong position feels more natural. So that's why I like to say that poor posture is not laziness. It's tightness and it's habit. And that's a very good exercise to do regularly, just to take yourself out of a flex position while you're sitting. But also it helps you release some of that tightness. It also helps you switch on some of those muscles which habitually switch off the longer you stay in those flex positions. But don't get hung up on correct posture. You can actually do yourself quite a bit of harm by trying to force yourself to stay in a posture that you supposedly think is correct. There's absolutely nothing wrong with flexing your spine. Look, highly experienced qualified physios on the screen sitting in a slump position right now. It must be good. There's nothing wrong with flexing your spine. As long as you, firstly, don't stay like that forever. And secondly, be careful what you do next. That's the most important thing to understand. There's no one perfect posture to sit in. It's just the one that feels comfortable and relaxed for you. And I think we tend to fall into a bit of a trap when we force people to stay in these postures excessively. Let's just do a couple other things while we're there. And again, follow along if you want. We're going to get Kieran to now just to very quickly do stretches of the 3 muscles that tend to adapt to a seated position by shortening. So we call these the big 3. There's actually a big 4, but we'll just do the big 3 for now. He's just going to move his camera so you can see what he's doing. And so just let's just show them the muscles first, KB. So bring your chair back in and sit, and let's just show them the hamstrings. So if you look at someone in a seated position, you'll generally find there's 3 main groups of muscles, sets of muscles that are generally shorter than they need to be. First one's hamstrings. You can see that the knee's bent, so the hamstrings are shorter. The hip flexor, the muscles that go from the top of your femur up into your spine, they tend to be shorter. And one that a lot of people don't realize is biceps, which is the muscle that connects your elbow to your shoulder. That is often very tight. It's often very tight on the dominant side because we spend a lot of the time with it in slight flexion in that movement. Yeah. So let's just look at quickly how to stretch those 3. So stand up if you want and follow Kieran along, follow Kieran through this process. First one, just putting your heel on a chair. And most people have stretched their hamstrings at footy training or whatever, and they know they just sort of slump forwards to try and touch the toes or something like that, some sort of stretch like that. Just show us that one. Just any old kind of hamstring stretch. That's not bad. It's not an ineffective stretch, but we've found this variation on this movement to be a hell of a lot more effective. I want the person doing the stretching to put their back foot facing straight forwards, so that foot doesn't even turn outwards slightly. And then you bring your hips square to the front. And that's it. And for a lot of you, that'll do it. Who's getting a stretch just in that position? If you're not, then just poke your tailbones out slightly. There we go. That's it. We don't exactly know why this works, but over years of experience, I've found this a very powerful stretch, and it really has a strong impact on the level of tension you have through these muscles. So yeah, and just hold that for 3 or 4 deep breaths. People often say to me, how long do you hold a stretch for? I just say, until you feel it release slightly. And that with hamstrings, that can be a little while. It can be 30 seconds or longer. But yeah, you can help floss the nerve a little bit by just pulling your toes toward you and away from you, just having that nerve slide through its sheath a little bit. Okay, now just bring that leg down again. That's a pretty strong hamstring stretch for a lot of you. Probably haven't done that in a while. Stand with your legs together. What does that leg feel like compared to the one you haven't stretched yet? Anyone notice?
It feels longer.
Yeah, it's because it is now slightly longer than the one you haven't stretched yet. Yeah, because those hamstrings, like any muscles, they clamp joints together. We stretch those muscles slightly and those joints open up a little bit. It's only enough. I mean, we could put a credit card under your heel and you'd feel a difference in the length. It's only very slight, but yeah, it just shows you how quickly you change things once you know what you're doing. All right, let's try the other one while we're there. So again, back foot facing straight forwards, bring your hips square to the front, bend only from the waist, just poke your bum out a little bit. And yeah, it's a very strong, this is actually not even really a hamstring stretch anymore. It's stretching the ITB a little bit. It's stretching the nerve sheaths. It's doing lots of things, but it's generally lengthening what has been shortening as you've been in that seated position. Okay, then relax. Alrighty. And then what about the hip flexors? I'll get Kieran to show you how to stretch those as well. So there's a number of ways in doing this, and we're just going to show you one from a standing position here. It's just a normal stride forward. Yep. You just bend the back knee slightly. Oh, let's walk you through actually how this works. Just put one hand on your lower back. Just one hand on your lower back. And then just lunge forward. Just bend the front knee and lunge forward onto the front knee and then come back out of that. Just sort of lunging back and forwards like that. Can you see when you do that, as you lunge forward, that your lower back goes into a deeper arch? That's the hip flexor on that left leg of Kieran there. That's pulling the spine into a deeper arch. To do the stretch, all you need to do is stop your back from arching. So tuck your tailbones under, pull your tummy tight, lunge forward the same. There you go. You'll feel a mild stretch down the front of your thigh there. That's the hip flexor. It's hard to feel a very strong, specific stretch there, but it's just a mild stretch. Okay, let's try that on the other side. Yep, same again. Lunging forwards, tailbones tucked under, tummy pulled tight. Oh yeah, you can sort of laterally flex the spine a bit in that position if you want. So you're just reaching up and over as you do it. Make it more complicated. Okay, that's good. And what about biceps? So here you need to just find a corner of a doorway or a wall or a partition or something you can get your hand against. Yep. Palm against the object, hand about level with your shoulder. You have to experiment with this with the height the height that kind of works best for you. But normally it's about level with your shoulder. Then yeah, just turn your chest away. Just turn your body away from where that arm's pinned against the object, and you're now getting it. This is a pectoral stretch. You should be feeling this in the front of the chest and the shoulder. Yeah. And then to turn this into a bicep stretch, because these bicep muscles do get chronically tight, you just simply turn the hand over. Yeah, and put the back of your hand against whatever you are holding it against. And do the same movement, just turn your shoulders away. And you'll now feel quite a specific sharp stretch going into that bicep muscle. There's another number of ways of doing this, and we don't want to turn this small seminar into a big exercise class, but you can make a fist and put the eye of the fist against whatever you get like that, and then try stretching away like that. That'll do it as well for some people. Yeah. Okay, and just try that on the other side, just so that we don't all walk funny after this. So firstly, stretching the pecs. And this is a very fast run through. We would normally take a fair bit more time to do these. And then biceps, back of your hand against whatever. Okay, that's good. So grab a seat again, those of you who played along with that little game. And let's sit you back into that strong position again, or something close to that efficient posture. Remembering that I think of good posture as just something you rest into every now and then, rather than force yourself to sit like that for a long period of time. But again, take note, what's happened to your resistance to that position now? And so there, through experience, plus a bit of information, you have changed your story about what posture is, hopefully. And that's the essence of what the Strong Spine program is all about. It's about giving people experiences through movement to think about how they move themselves and how they address their sitting posture. And obviously that's a very important little skill progression, why poor posture is not laziness, we call it, to show drivers, because it helps them understand how they're reacting to the seat, what sitting for long periods of time can do to them, and how they can ameliorate that risk with a slight change in their habits. So I want to hand over to Kieran now and ask Kieran a couple of very pointed questions, and because he's coming from a more clinical background than me, and he's treated and helped a lot of people who've suffered from extensive chronic back pain. And it starts with himself, because before he was a physio, and I've got to say about Kieran, having worked with him over these 20 years, he's not so in love with physiotherapy that he would do it if he thought it wasn't helping people. I know he thought about being a marron farmer at one point. So he's pretty committed to just... What's that?
Used to be a flight attendant, as you can see from the demonstrations of that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, yeah, pretty committed to just doing what works. Not so in love with being a physio that he wants to stick with it if he thought it was just sort of something that was just doing by rote, if you know what I mean. But yeah, had a serious back injury himself when he was a young fellow, when he was 16, and he'll tell you the story about that. And mate, if you could go back and talk to that 16-year-old Kieran who couldn't play footy for a year as a kid, what kind of experience would you like to give him, to have given him?
The list is long of the things I'd like to tell that guy, but on his back in particular, I'd love to be able to work with him just to instill the confidence he's back again. I think that was my experience at the time. I lost all confidence in my back, and I'd spent a lot of time doing exactly that, working with people now with chronic back pain, helping them to regain the confidence in their body and trust their back, and to just gain the experience that lends them the hope that their back is still the strongest part of their body, or one of them. And that's often what is lost. People sort of fragility mindset, fearful of movement, fearful of bending, isolated from a lot of the things they love doing through being locked into protective behaviours. And if I could share my story, I grew up in Kojonup, Western Australia, very close to Katanning, where Kingsley was from. We didn't know each other as kids, but came from a similar background, country WA. And as a young fellow, I was a sleepwalker, and for some reason was on the top bunk, stepped off in the middle of the night, landed on the bottom bunk on my back. Spent a week off school in primary school, and that was a pretty traumatic experience I still remember to this day. And then later, when I was about 16, as in year 10 or 11, I was back shifting some stuff on the property with my dad, and I was walking down a gravel driveway holding half a tree trunk or something heavy, and I slipped and fell on my bum, and that fired my back pain up like I'd never experienced. And despite physio and chiro and things, I couldn't play football that year. It put me in a world of hurt, and it took me a long while to sort of get back from that. And I really remember that Dad was doing taekwondo, and I was able to sort of do some of the stretches with him when I was on holidays with him, and that seemed to help. So I stuck to that, just built a habit out of that. So that instilled in me a trust of that keeping muscles long, particularly hamstrings and the back muscles, that I still do to this day, some of those stretches. So that if you have a formative experience that drives a set of beliefs that stay with you, that drives your behaviour, and that you can see from, and I can see from that. That's what happened to me. I also learned some protective behaviours which stayed with me and are still evidenced in my body now, in that I learned to keep my back straight. I found for that year that I was sore in the acute setting, when things were still quite acutely irritated from the initial trauma, keeping it straight helped. And I sort of learnt that as a habit through working on mules and cradles and shearing sheds, and any job I did in my holidays, plus getting through school and sitting at my desk. I just felt that I was more comfortable sitting up straight. And in doing that, my body learned to do that as a protective behaviour. Now working with patients, I look for those protective behaviours that have come from those experiences where they were useful at some point, often early in the experience, could be 20-something years ago, in my case, 30-something years ago now. And they don't leave you. Your body's protective centres, just like you learn how to cross a busy road in traffic, or learn how to ride a bike and not fall off it because it hurts. Pain governs a lot of our learnings and our behaviours. And that one stayed with me to the point where, when I was doing my training as a functional capacity evaluator, later on in the physio, in a litigious setting, we assess people's capacity. With a lot of gadgets and goniometers measure range of movement, and in testing each other, I found my back was in the lowest 25th percentile. So the 75% of the normative data had more range of movement in their lumbar spine than I did at the age of 26. And I was appalled. I thought my back was flexible. I could touch my toes. I had long hamstrings. I wasn't bending my back. And it didn't even go past neutral when I fully touched my toes. So that was quite interesting for me at that time, and didn't really understand how that may have come to be until I was involved with a large randomised control study on chronic back pain that was government funded. It was just finished its intake now. It's yet to be published, but that's been in the last 5 years working with that team, a technique called cognitive functional therapy, where we look at chronic pain and what drives the behaviours that keep people locked in these pain settings. And that was that helped me understand from my learnings as a back pain sufferer, that what I'd learned to do was not move my back, and I'd lost a lot of that range. So I've been working pretty hard on getting that back and feeling looser and become more comfortable, day to day. It's a slow process of getting that back. So yeah, that would be something I'd love to go back to. Short circuit of that 30 years of being stiff and tired and sore.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time now getting people to relax and get rid of the unnecessary tension, and trust that their spine is inherently really, really strong.
Yeah.
So how did we get to the point where industry has been convinced in the last 4 or 5 years that training doesn't work?
Yeah, I'd say further than that. I palpated, and we both did, a sense of mistrust around manual handling training sort of creeping into industry. Late 2000s, and when you look at the data behind that, I saw a lovely presentation by some Canadians that had also recognised this. It wasn't just an Australian or a Perth-based Kingsley and me thing that we sort of understood this was happening. They thought that didn't sound right when this headline came across from a lot of ergonomic settings and forums that was like, manual handling training doesn't work. So they looked into it, and what these fellas and this group of professionals in Canada found was that the 5 systematic reviews that were done between 2007 and 2014, 77 papers. I won't get too complex on numbers with you here, but it's important that we understand how this narrative came to be and came to be well entrenched. Was at least 5 systematic reviews, which are like going out to all of the evidence available from the evidence base at the time, and there were several of them that confirmed the headline manual handling training doesn't work, as each of those systematic reviews looked at the quality of the evaluation of the manual handling programs, not the quality of the manual handling programs themselves. And as it happened, the ones with the best evaluation processes were, as you can imagine, the ones that were PowerPoint-driven, group settings, easily manageable group of people, where you've got them at a desk, where you fill in some good feedback forms and follow up with them easily. The manual handling training, or more coaching, we like to call it, style where you do it in situ, in random positions, often in the workplace where the workers are. You don't have a lot of those evaluation tools at your disposal. So what happened, as we experienced, is that your evaluation and follow-up wasn't great. So the data on the effectiveness of those programs that they were looking for in order to publish were left out. So those studies were left out of the systematic reviews. Hence the headline, when you're left with only the quality feedback, was that from the poor quality training does not work. And that should have been the headline, but they didn't discern between the levels of quality training and poor quality training.
So bad training doesn't work and coaching people does, I think is the
update on that narrative. That poor quality manual handling training doesn't work. And we can all agree that if we've had to sit through a PowerPoint of slides on how to lift, that it's one way, and Nick will tell you, is a good way to improve your sleep budget. Yeah, so that's an interesting story from my point.
Yeah. So we've used up a lot of our time talking about this sort of stuff, but yeah, we want to throw it open for questions now. Anyone's got any questions on that kind of stuff? And yeah, I guess just to summarise, yeah, coming back to that idea that information alone, which is bad training, doesn't change people's behaviour. Information with the right experience clearly does.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyone got any questions for us? I'll pull up the chat. I've got the chat here if anyone wants to type any in or if they want to say it.
Much questions. I just thought that was really interesting. Different way to look at manual handling, because like you say, you see plenty of presentations and don't do this and don't do that.
Thanks, Kate.
No worries.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I think it was really excellent and very clear and very valuable to each of us that got to participate, but also with some really clear tips that we can pass on to others as well too. So greatly appreciated. Yeah. Yep.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Any other questions from anyone there? Well, that shows you've been exceptionally thorough.
We would hope so.
Everyone's just still sitting in their chair, kind of relaxed and stunned. It's quite often when you can imagine a full strong spine session, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And we even get people on the floor. And if you ask people how they feel afterwards, they'll often go, oh, yeah, just kind of good and really soft and relaxed. And I'm always sort of saying, no, that's just normal. What we've done is reset you back to normal. You've just gradually crept up. Like we said is the title of the seminar, it's a ratchet. Gradually that tension builds up and just doing a few simple things releases it. Yeah. So hopefully some of you have felt that this morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully so.
Definitely, for sure. And so I'm just going to screen share again. Sorry if I can do this right. Let me get this up. Okay, so obviously heaps of thanks to you two gents for joining us this morning and sharing that really great content with us. If you're happy, I will share a link with the participants today to your contact details and resources. And hopefully everyone on board can share it with colleagues and get in touch directly with Kingsley and Kieran if there's a session or something they'd like to run within their organisations. We'll reach out to you. So that's it for our webinar series for this year. We'll aim to run a few more next year, so I'll pop everyone's names on our mailing list unless you let me know that you don't want to be there, about information that we'll be putting out next year. And yeah, any questions, you'll have my email details so you can get in touch. And yeah, wishing everyone a happy, safe, festive season. And thanks again, Kieran and Kingsley and everyone for participating today. Cheers.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you. Bye.